Hello everyone, welcome back to the SBK Betting Podcast. It's the first of 2025, so a very happy new year to you all you new listeners, all you those who've been with us all of 2024, and prior to that as well. We're looking forward to a really cracking new year. It is the 2nd of January, so we're coming to you at a very quiet point in the season after a scintillating festive period. We were really eagerly anticipating the racing from Boxing Day onwards if you did join us on our festive special, and it didn't disappoint on both sides of the Irish Sea. The comeback of all comebacks from Constitution Hill, the epic chasing debut of Sergino, we had the monster performance from Brighter Days Ahead, Galopin Deschamps regaining his stranglehold of the Gold Cup division, and added to that a gluttony of winners from this podcast, headlined by Tom Collins' Banbridge selection in the King George. And as Christmas presents go, TC, and that wasn't your only winner. We had Constitution Hill as well in the Christmas hurdle along with Ross. That must have been one of the Boxing Days that you'll remember for years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Banbridge obviously being not only the selection, but a horse that both myself and Ross, and you as well, Jess, we've all kind of taken to over the years. He's regularly fallen short at that kind of level, but it was good to see him get off the mark in the King George. And I have to admit, despite not feeling well on Boxing Day, and subsequently, as you can probably tell by my voice, I did stand up and give him a proper roar when he came to Ile-Francais, and I'm glad he went on by. That was definitely the highlight for me. And to be honest, it makes amends for the previous King George when I put up Shishkin as the play, and we all know what happened there with Hewick eventually coming through to win and Shishkin getting rid of Nico. So it kind of made amends, but I was very happy with Banbridge. Unfortunately, though, the nap didn't go in. I thought it was going to be an excellent 10 to 15 minutes for the podcast and myself with Banbridge, followed by Foster's Fortune up at Sedgefield, I think it was, and he got beat half a length. And so it was kind of the proper encapsulation of horse racing betting right there. You went from the highs of Banbridge to the lows of being beaten in a very close finish with the nap. But yeah, look, the Cold Christmas period was brilliant, and Banbridge was my highlight.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that the podcast in general had a pretty decent Christmas. My nap also, King Arise, couldn't get there on the line at Wincanton, so that was frustrating. But Potter's Charm did it in the Formby Hurdle. He's a very exciting novice prospect, and there's lots of novices in that sort of division from the UK aspect. I think that we're going to look forward to when it comes to the spring festivals. Obviously, Cheltenham is the major one, but there's lots of other big race meetings coming up over the next while. But we know that this time of year is quieter. This weekend's racing, nothing spectacular. There is a bit of a lull before we pick up again with, as I said, those spring festivals in mind. So we're going to do something a little bit different for the first podcast of 2025, and we're going to have a reminisce on 2024 and have a look back on what was a real standout moment for individual tipsters and for the podcast moments. And we're also going to put up some ante-post selections for this year, and we're going to think about jumps racing, but we're also going to dust away the cobwebs of the flat form book, and I'm supposed TC never puts that away at all anyway, so much to his delight, he's been tasked with coming up with a selection for the flat season of 2025, which is only a few months away now, TC. It's going to come around before we know it. But first up, best bets of 2024. And always, this is great fun, a great opportunity to think back on what were the highlights. And Ross, I know that there was one horse in particular that myself and you really, have enjoyed seeing in 2024. And sadly, it looks like his racing career is going to be very much in the doubt now after a recent injury, and that's Chianti Classico. And I imagine he was a real highlight for you. But what else alongside him was your best of 2024?
Best bets. I'm not one for going back. I always try and look forward, Jess, but I suppose Chianti Classico was probably my best result. Tipped him up at 33-1 ante-post for the Ultima, and just loved him all last season. So that was good. But I think the most satisfying bet for a number of reasons was probably Thunder Rock in the Premier Chase up at Kelso. It's a bit of a laughing standing joke, isn't it, in the group that I do like Thunder Rock and neither of you two do. So it was with some trepidation I actually put him forward as the next best for the Premier Chase at Kelso. And what was satisfying about it was I really felt like I'd worked the race out and worked the horse out. He doesn't like big fields, so those handicaps are just no good to him. And I was convinced that he was going to be better for 3 miles. I know Ollie Murphy, his trainer, wasn't so sure, but everything about him screamed that he was going to be better over 3 miles. And he was a decent price because he'd run so badly in the handicap at Cheltenham the time before. So he was tipped up at 10-1. I didn't like Monbeg Genius at all, who was the ante-post favourite or the early market favourite. So it's just satisfying. It worked out. Monbeg Genius ran no sort of race at all and has been regressive pretty much since, hasn't he? And Thunder Rock went through the race like a dream, turning in. I thought Sean Byrne had given him plenty to do, and I was starting to get a bit jittery because he was just sat very still, but he got there very easily, ran out a 7-length winner. So there was a good degree of satisfaction from that. And I would point out that much you think I just follow this horse over a cliff, I haven't tipped him up since, haven't backed him since. I'm hoping he might go back to the Premier Chase at Kelso this year, and he'd be one to follow again for me. So yeah, probably Thunder Rock in the Premier Chase is my best, most satisfying bet of the season.
Yeah, Thunder Rock at Kelso, Chianti Classico at Cheltenham, two horses that really encapsulated great jumps racing last season. What about you, TC? I'd imagine I could take a strong guess at this because it was probably one of my favourite podcast moments this year when I raised my white flag to you and I knew I'd been beaten and I had let myself down because I was with you early days with City of Troy. I then lost all faith after the Guineas, but your faith in him was restored and you came on this podcast and you were absolutely adamant that we can forgive a horse for one bad run, and he duly rewarded your faith in him. So a satisfying moment this year was City of Troy in the Derby.
Yeah, for sure. He's definitely my highlight of 2024 from a punting perspective on this podcast. It was crucial that it says on this podcast in the running order for this best bet of 2024 section. I've had bigger winners. I've also had kind of bigger priced winners, despite the fact the City of Troy was put up at 14-1 ante-post. But from an enjoyment perspective and a horse that we put up on the pod, City of Troy has to be my selection here in the Derby. I was about to say Derby then. Look, I don't want to harp on. I feel like this category can be a bit self-indulgent, but when everyone ditches a horse and you stay with them, you get that extra kind of bit of gratification when the horse goes and gets the job done. Obviously, the Guineas wasn't ideal, but that is a lesson for myself moving forward, even though I kind of had it this year as well, but for everyone else as well. If one horse who has already shown a high level of ability disappoints, they can easily come back and go in again. You can't just completely write a horse off because of it. And City of Troy was the proper example of that in 2024. And yeah, I mean, his Derby win was probably the most relieved I've been after a race and the most joyous too.
Yeah, and look, and I think that's great advice from a tipster like yourself. And Ross would be the same. We've had it with the likes of the National Hunt horses. Constitution Hill was a great example as well. We could see value in a horse's price when there was doubts about whether they're still the same horse that they were before. If there was a lot of rhetoric that these horses have gone at the game and all of this, but being true to what you believe in and knowing that horses can come back and knowing the right trainers who can do it as well. And I think we've learned never to underestimate the likes of Aidan O'Brien and Nicky Henderson for that fact as well. Yeah, as you say, a wonderful moment. My best bet actually came the day before. I put up Azalea in the Oaks, and a horse that sort of has probably gone a little bit forgotten now because she sadly had an injury, which meant that she was retired subsequently from racing. But it was a fine training performance from Dermot Weld, a super easy ride for Chris Hayes. She was 7-2. She should have been shorter. She was given just a beautiful prep into the race by such a master trainer, quite under the radar, really. She wasn't that flashy in her trial, but she was just brilliant in the Oaks itself. And it just goes to show, those Aga Khan families are still nurturing and producing some brilliant racehorses. So that was definitely my best moment of 2024 from a betting perspective. But that was then. What about next and now and 2025? We've got Cheltenham only 3 and a bit months away now. We've also got plenty of racing left to come from jumps of this season. And I know, Ross, I'd say this is when it gets really good. Your form is really taking place. You've got the horses that have really caught your eye before Christmas, and now you're thinking ahead to what's going to happen over the next 2 months. So what's your Cheltenham ante-post bet that's really going to make the next cold few months that go that little bit quicker?
I thought the Christmas period was quite informative, actually, Jess, with regards to Cheltenham. There's a few that I think have sort of paved the way where they're going to go, or at least in my head they have. There's a few. Corbett's Cross for the stayers, for example. I think that's where he should end up. Factor File dropping back to the Ryanair trip, but I'm cautious of trying to outthink Willie Mullins and Emmett Mullins. So the horse that I think has just been hugely sort of disregarded for the Cheltenham Gold Cup at 28-1 is Spillans Tower. I think this is a really talented horse. I said on the Christmas podcast that in my mind he was the most exciting second season chaser for staying trips. Just because I didn't think Factor File was gonna stay a strongly run 3 miles in open company. He went to the King George. I'm surprised they ran him. They did say they wouldn't run him if they was good in the description. It was good to soft. I think he probably rode quicker than that, and he just got taken off his feet early on in the race. He could never really get into a rhythm. His jumping slightly suffered for that, but I think rhythm is so important to seeing out a trip, because if you watch the back end of the race, you would say he's shaped like a non-stayer. He was weakening at the end where you'd expect him to be running on. But when I'm got my other hat on and I'm doing my coaching for sports horses, I train using something called the Scales of Training, which is a German system. It's a blueprint for training, but it's in a step process. And the first one is always rhythm, because you work on the basis of a horse in a rhythm, it's got a very good chance of relaxing. And I think that can apply the same with racing. He didn't really relax. You could see when you're watching it, he was in top gear the whole way. He probably wouldn't have breathed as effectively. And I think that compromised his finishing effort. His stamina is proven. He won the novice champion stayers chase at Punchdown last year, beat Monty Starr, who's a really strong stayer himself. I think that was a good piece of form. I think the markets have reacted to one poor piece of form at Kempton, the King George, which is a track that simply wouldn't have suited him anyway. The ground wouldn't have suited him. Huge overreaction. His run in the John Durham was excellent. He went off a big price for that. And he drifted out all day, which told you that he perhaps wasn't fully tuned up for that. It was a prep race for the King George. He was the first off the bridle of the first 4 home, finished to really good effect, and jumping the last, halfway between the last and the line, it looked like he was going to pick Factor File up, and then his effort slightly flattened out, and I think that was probably race fitness. So I think Spillans Tower, as an each way bet in the Gold Cup, I don't see anything beating Galloping de Champs, but I don't want to back short price because things can go wrong. But I think Spillans Tower is an each way bet in the Gold Cup. I think that's where he'll go, because I think Factor Fire will go to the Ryanair, or I hope he will. Corbett's Cross could perhaps drop into the stayers, and then of course JP's going to want a runner. I know the way you're thinking, and this lad, and I think this is where he'll go. It's the only race he can go for, so I like that in my ante-post bet. So Spillans Tower, an each way bet, I think is a really good each way bet for the Gold Cup.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Ross. I think Spillans Tower is still a very exciting prospect in this Gold Cup division, and certainly whatever they do with him next in between now and the Gold Cup, potentially he could run once more. Potentially they go straight there, but still a very exciting prospect for the JP McManus team. Okay, TC, what about you? Obviously, you got really into the jumping game now. It's like the flat never happened, but it just goes to show, the form is it's so great when jump racing is good. It can really work for tipsters regardless of each division, but you just got such a knack of all of them that you put your hand to. So what is it that you've been taken by, and who are you looking forward to from a Cheltenham perspective?
Well, I'm looking forward to a whole bundle of horses. Look, I could have come up with a short list of maybe 5 to 10 horses that I think have great chances in their respective races. However, this section on the running order specifically says Cheltenham ante-post, and I've only had one Cheltenham ante-post bet, so I'm going to stick with that play. That actually came in March last year, March 2024, when I placed it. But I'll mention it again. I think I mentioned it once straight after Cheltenham Festival last year when we did our roundup of the festival, and it hasn't been mentioned since. So I'll go in with that, and then closer to the time of Cheltenham, I'll start to reveal hopefully some other fancies when I've bet them. The one ante-post play I've had is on the yellow clay, and he runs in the Albert Bartlett, or I hope he does anyway. And he was 33-1. I think he's around 14-16, which is still a fair price in my opinion, based on what he's done this year. But in the bumper last season, I thought he shaped like a proper stayer, a horse that wants distance. He was a real eye catcher in that race, and he just screamed to me, bet me for the Albert Bartlett, so I did. I've been very impressed with him so far in 3 runs this campaign. He's run over 2 miles 6, I believe, first time up, and 2 miles 6.5 maybe, and then a couple of starts over 2.5 miles. He's been good each time. Now, last time up, I think, was the crucial factor for the yellow clay, which people may be overlooking, insofar as he looked beaten until the final 100 yards and then rallied down the outside to justify a short price. Maybe he wasn't as impressive as the market kind of suggests he would be, but I think it was more a case of 2.5 miles is definitely on the sharp side for him. He can still win good races over that distance, and he's entered in the Lawlers coming up this week, actually, over that kind of trip. But he wants 3 miles. And I think when he steps up to 3 miles and Gordon kind of goes down that route officially full time, we're going to see the best from the yellow clay. And I hope that happens pre-Cheltenham, or at least going into Cheltenham in the Albert Bartlett. So yeah, this is my only ante-post bet at this stage. I'm on him at 33s, but I still think 16, considering he's 3 from 3 this year and proved that he can jump a hurdle and prove that he's top quality, I still think 16 is a fair price. So he's the horse I'm putting up, the yellow clay.
Okay, yeah, interesting, and as you say, holding that feeling, that belief that you had from all those months ago, nearly a year ago now, and hoping that it will come good. Is say Son of Yates, who's got an amazing record at Cheltenham as well, progeny of Yates, and the yellow clay. We'll see how this sort of preparation in goes for him, I suppose. But you touched on an important angle in that we will be a lot more clued up, probably know more definitively where horses are going, races that are going to, and we will of course have our Cheltenham Festival special, which we look forward to recording every year, where we'll be able to really dig into it. But as we know with this podcast, we focus on the weekend's racing, and when it gets to Cheltenham, then we can properly have a good study of it. But for me, I'll just add one in that I'm excited for. I think he's a horse, and it's a nice sort of profile of a horse where, you know, we're used to the likes of Mullins, and you know, even if he didn't have the best of Christmases, he still holds 6 or 7 ante-post favourites. And I don't like putting up something that's like too obvious, but a horse that I actually saw when presenting at Ludlow earlier on in the year, a horse, Hatiti Couleur, I saw him finishing runner-up in a maiden hurdle for Rebecca Curtis. And I spoke to her afterwards and said, God, he's a lovely horse, got really good-looking son of Dragon Dancer. So not a massively eye-catching pedigree, but just a big physical. And as a 7-year-old running second in a maiden hurdle, he's clearly had his issues. He's been a bit tricky to train, and she just said he's a big baby, so much learning to do, and he's sprouted wings recently this season. Going chasing has really made a man of him. He's shown that he's progressive, one thing, but just such a natural over fences. And he's really improved for the trip going up to 3 mile and further. But it was the victory at Cheltenham that just got everyone talking. He beat Transmission, a very solid horse, comfortably, and has left Rebecca Curtis in the position of having either the option of keeping him in handicap company or going to something like the Brown Advisory, which he could. But ultimately might be outclassed him, but I think he's a kind of horse that has the profile to give himself a good go kick at that, or the National Hunt Chase. I just think he's a very exciting, useful type that might just be overlooked because of his profile and the fact that he's an 8-year-old now, and he's still a novice. So Hatiti Couleur for me, and that adds to Splan's Tower and the yellow clay as well from an ante-post perspective. Okay, we've given both Ross and TC the opportunity now to go for another ante-post bet and more of an area of their choice, or a race in particular, or a type of horse that they really like to find an ante-post edge with. And I know, Ross, last year it was sort of heartbreak for you in the Grand National, race that you really like to get your teeth into. So what is it this year in that race that you've got you're focusing on, and do you have an ante-post bet for us?
So last year I tipped up Minella Indo at 50s for the Grand National, working on the basis he was a classy horse, dropping into handicaps. And I think these days for a Grand National, you do want a classy performer. The days where solid handicappers could sort of grind it out are long gone, given that the way the weights are framed these days, with sort of top weights generally being very talented horses. There's a slightly similar theme in that it's Minella Kakuna this year. He's nowhere near as big a price, but I think he's a really classy horse. He had 2 good pieces of staying form last year. In the Irish National, he was a third. Perhaps didn't jump as efficiently through that race as he could have done. Was a little bit keen to the early stages, and having got into second, he weakened in the close stages. That was on heavy ground, but that was a really good run. I mean, Intense Raffles beat him 4 lengths, is now £8 worse off. So, sorry, he was giving him £8, now going to be £4 worse off. So that sort of levels up that sort of distance. And then Any Second Now was second. I think he went into that race really well handicapped. And what I really liked is Minella Kakuna showed how tough he was. Came out just 3 weeks later in the Whitbread, or the Bet365, I suppose we should call it. Ran a really good race, settled beautifully at the rear of the field, came right round the outside, turning in at Sandown across the pond fence, got to the front and was really gritty and tough up the hill. And I felt he was the strongest stayer of the first 4 home. I thought it was a really good run. He's made satisfactory returns this year. It certainly looks like he's been campaigned very much with spring targets in mind, and I don't see that being anything other than the Grand National. To be honest, if you've run well in Irish National, run well in a Whitbread, why wouldn't you look at the National? He's dropped £2. He ran moderately in the John Dirk, and he was never really put into it. And then he ran in the Savills over Christmas, and I thought he went really nicely for that race. He settled and jumped as well as I've ever seen him. Got tired turning in, but was given a very easy time, beaten a long way. But I'm sure, like I said, he's been campaigned with the spring in mind. I'm sure he wasn't fully wound up. And you could also throw in that a few of these didn't perhaps fire, and didn't find much off the bridle over the Christmas period. So he's around about 17 to 1 with SBK. I think that's a decent price. I wouldn't be surprised if he was one of the favourites come the day, particularly if he has a good prep run before that. And crucially, he's going to get a nice racing weight. Last year, his rating would have given him 11 stone 3, but I Am Maximus is likely to go back to defend his title. He's going to be top rate off 169. So currently, his rating as it is now could see him get potentially even under 11 stone, or certainly around that. So a nice racing weight. Willie Mullins really knows how to win the National these days, and I think he's the one that would be most appealing at this stage for the National.
Okay, another Manila Kakuna this time for Ross in the Grand National. We're not asking TC to have an ante-post pump for the Grand National, but he probably does somewhere hiding. But the flat is your focus always. And it's, we've both done this kind of sort of a rethink about the flat horses that we're looking forward to seeing when it gets into the summer months. But how do you sort of cut out the wheat from the chaff, I suppose, because you've probably seen so many nice, exciting prospects going into this new year. What is the kind of horse that really makes the winter go a little bit quicker for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it depends what kind of division you're focusing on. Look, there are plenty of 2-year-olds going into 3-year-olds that are still maidens that are very eye-catching from last season that you want to bet first time up or second time up this campaign. I've got a couple of nursery prospects or handicap prospects on my tracker as well, which I'm looking forward to getting stuck into. They'll be featuring on our weekly podcasts when we get into the spring and the summer, that's for sure. But from an ante-post perspective, obviously you're looking at the classics. That's kind of the only markets up available for you to take advantage of. The Irish classics, I don't think you can ever really know this far in advance who's going to run in them, just purely because of the team that Aidan O'Brien has. He splits them up last minute, and it's kind of a guessing game at this part. So I wouldn't be betting any of those ante-post. The Derby and Guineas, both for the Colts, interesting division right now. The Lion in Winter's obviously the horse to beat. But I think he takes up so much for the market, and he looks so good at 2 that I don't necessarily want to take him on. So from an ante-post perspective, there was only one race that really caught my eye, and that was the St. Leger. Now, I understand the markets aren't fully available everywhere, but I have had a little tickle in this market, and it's on a horse called Saratoga, ironically named for a person who loves racing at Saratoga in the US. He's around 25 to 1 for the St. Leger. He's also about 50 to 1 for the Derby, which would be interesting if he was to go there. But right now, that would be more on the back burner. I wouldn't bet him in that market. I'd rather him for the St. Leger. Now, here's the reasons why. He's only had one start and he got beaten. He finished 3rd in what was a pretty average novice event as well on debut. But he was sent off favourite. He's a big, gross, scopy individual, and I thought he shaped pretty well over a quite clearly inadequate trip. He's a backwards type, as talked about by Aidan previously in a stable tour last season, and he was given tender handling. So I don't think you can read too much into that. What I do love about Saratoga is the pedigree. He's by Camelot, who finished 2nd in the 2012 St. Leger. He is out of Dialafara, who has also produced Capri, however you want to say it, who won the 2017 St. Leger. Tower of London, who finished 4th in the 2023 Leger, as well as Passion and Cypress Creek. Both of those horses have won good races over 1.6 miles or 2 miles. So there's so much stamina. He's bred exactly to run in the St. Leger and to go very close in the St. Leger. And I thought that debut was pretty promising, considering he was running over a trip that's likely to be half the distance he wants. So I'll take Saratoga as a sneaky each way. Probably the first time, or hopefully the first time you've heard of this horse, and hopefully the first time you've heard anyone put him up ante-post. So just watch out for him in the St. Leger. I don't expect him to start the year in good form. He'll probably run over 1 mile or 1.2 miles and be outclassed or outsped in the early part of the race by horses with just better turns of foot or more speed. But as we get through the campaign, closer and closer towards September, I think he'll really develop into an Illinois 2.0 kind of type. So the 25 to 1 right now seems fair.
Yeah, and we know Illinois, a horse that you really liked last year. This horse, as you say, oh God, that pedigree. Camelot being the leading sire in Europe, thanks to the heroics of Blue Stocking, and this has just got stamina written all over him. The dam has just been excellent with these staying types, as you say, Capri, Tower of London, and yeah, a really interesting type that you would imagine is probably going under most people's radar. As you say, it was a great year, and always is for 2-year-olds. But I think there's a lot of good crop of 2-year-olds in lots of different yards. We've got Rafe Beckett with, I think, 50 odd 2-year-old winners last year. Of course, Aiden, Charlie Appleby got going a little bit late, and then you've got so many everywhere. Obviously, the young sort of Newmarket trainers, but sort of dovetailing off you there a little bit. I've got a horse from my ante-post bets perspective that actually came from the Jessica Harrington team. And she's had some lovely types. She won the Futurity at the end of the season with Hot as Hell, which was a bit of a surprise winner, actually. 11-1, I think he was. And being by Too Darn Hot, I remember Jesse saying that he's well named because a hot animal, and I'm just wary of that a little bit. I want him to sort of grow physically and mentally mature a little bit. So I was thinking of him, and then looking at his form lines. Della Crow, the horse that he beat, Hot as Hell, was actually being beaten on 2 occasions by Jessica Harrington's other horse, which is my ante-post bet for the Derby, which is Green Impact. I was lucky enough to be at Leopardstown when watching him win the Champions Juvenile Stakes, which has been won by the likes of Auguste Rodin in the past. And he got given a great ride by Shane Foley. He dictated the race. He's a horse that can sort of set his own fractions and seems, unlike Hot as Hell, mentally very mature, but they decided not to run him again. They've kept him to knowing full well that he'd be a better 3-year-old, a son of Wootton Bassett. But what I couldn't believe is the price for the Derby. He might not necessarily be the most obvious one. And as TC has mentioned, the Lion and Winter is a type that's really going to dominate the betting. But 50-1 for a Derby is a good each way price at this moment for a horse that I know they're working backwards from. Whereas there are plenty that potentially might not even be Derby sort of types, but he looks like one for me. So looking forward to seeing him. But as I said, there could have been plenty for us to have picked from. But that is our ante-post bets for this season, from Grand Nationals to Cheltenhams to the flat season when it does unfold. We've got a little bit for you to put in your notebooks and your trackers to look forward to as the months roll in. And I suppose for you to think about if we might be without racing this weekend, because the temperatures are dipping, so much so that even Linkfield's all-weather meeting tomorrow on Friday has got an inspection. So it's bad when all-weather racing might not be able to kick on. So it could be touch and go, but we've still got some selections for you for the weekend. And SBK are offering a 20% Saturday racing ACCA boost. We've got the 4 legs minimum, and you can opt in for that. So we'll give you a couple of selections, and TC being in excellent form. So I'd imagine if you have got some jump selections, although we do have the all-weather if it's going to be on, is there anything that you're looking forward to on quite a quiet weekend?
Yeah, I have to admit, the racing this weekend is just terrible anyway for a Saturday, this is. And if half the meetings are called off, then we really are in trouble finding proper bets. But just one horse stands out for me in the UK domestically, and that is Nocte Velatus, who runs in the 240 at Wincanton. This is a middle distance veterans handicap chase, not really the race type I would generally go for. And only 6 horses are actually declared for it. But I think the majority of them just have huge question marks over their head, and therefore you have to kind of go for the solid option. The ones with question marks, the window maker hasn't run for 600 odd days, and it's definitely going to need the outing. Longshanks was beaten in a point-to-point recently that involved just 3 runners, and he finished second. He also wants further than this, as does Red Rookie, who hasn't won for 2 years, but is a 3-miler and now running over 2.5. Keldestan lost his action last time out and was pulled up on his previous start. He's also had wind surgery recently and it doesn't seem to have worked. So he's got a big question mark. Now that kind of leaves just 3 horses. Stormy Flight, who's a very consistent horse, but is beatable and has gone up the weights and is probably, under the thumb of the handicapper. Liligerian also gone on up in the weights, up £7 for a recent victory. He's a decent animal. He'll prefer if the ground, dries out a touch, but I think he's beatable. And that leaves Nocte Velatus, who ran a clear career best last time out, despite being a 10-year-old. That was a very good effort when finishing second. Prior to that, he was a strong victor at Chepstow when he set sail a long way from home, looked vulnerable between the second and the last, but then rallied again in the latter part of the race. Cameron Isles takes off weight, and I think Nocte Velatus is pretty much a good thing, providing the race goes ahead in the 240 at Wincanton. I believe he's around 5-2 at the time of recording, though that may change by the time it's published. No next best this week, Jess, but what I will say is there is good racing over in Riyadh, and I know plenty of people will probably flick through this bit because like, oh, Riyadh, no one cares about that. But the racing is genuinely good. I'm not just saying that because I've been out there this year. It's the proper Kings and King Cup this weekend. Loads of Group 1 action over there. 2 horses that stand out on Saturday, just if you want to have some international angle, especially if the domestic racing is called off. In race number 9 on Saturday at Riyadh is a horse called Montathabetta. Oh, I thought I was going to nail that first time. Montathabetta, who was just incredibly impressive under Camila Ospina last time. She should win. She'll be a short price, but I'm confident enough to say that she should win. And then in race 12 is my favourite horse in Saudi called Wait to Excel. Used to be trained by James Tate over here. It's a pretty good race, the King Saud Cup. It's a Group 1, but hopefully he can win under Alex Marino. So there are 2 little international pointers if you want to be watching the racing at Riyadh on Saturday, but the main domestic play is Nocte Velatus at Wincanton.
Yeah, as you say, we might not have racing on Saturday, and those that in need of racing might be keeping an eye out. And well remembered that there's some good racing out internationally, which won't have any effects of these minus temperatures that we looking like we're going to have over the next couple of days. Ross, what about you? We've got racing from Sandown, and there's a couple horses that I like there. Anything that you are looking forward to, and as we've said, quite a quiet weekend.
So both my nap and next best come from Sandown Jess. The first in the 115, and it's basically a case of rinse and repeat. Doddy the Great, I tipped him up for the handicap hurdle at Kempton over the Christmas period, got wiped out at the start, and Nico de Boyma very centrally pulled him up when it was very obvious that he had absolutely no chance. So he goes into 115 at Sandown. Just to repeat my case for him, it's the same as it was last time. He went chasing at the start of this season, and he ran no sort of race at all. It was one of the worst chase displays you'll see from a novice. He barely jumped the fence. I thought it was to immense credit that he still looked like he might play a hand turning in. Then another fence appeared. He belted that. That paid to that. But he's down £3 from a mark of 132 down to 129. He's got some really good hurdle form. He was second in the Greatwood hurdle off a mark of 131, running on really well at the end there. Soft ground, 2 miles at Cheltenham. Didn't look like enough of a stamina test. And then went to the Betfair, finished 4th, again flying home. That was heavy ground, and he made really good inroads after the last, having sort of been quite a long way back in a race where it paid to be fairly far forward, and he also got a little bit hampered as well, which didn't help his course. I don't think he would finish much closer, but it was a really good effort. The ground at Sandown at the moment is currently described as soft with some good soft patches on the chase course and soft on the hurdle. If there's any more rain to come, I can see that riding a little bit stiffer again. He's certainly not going to mind the ground. I think this step up in trip is the key to him. He's dropped down to a mark of 129 for really doing very little wrong. Because you remember at the back end of last year, Nicky Henson's horses weren't right. So I think you can write off his runs after the Betfair hurdle. I think he's a well-handicapped horse. One poor run over fences this season, but you can have a very valid reason for that because he just didn't jump. So Doddy the Great in the 115 is my nap.
Okay, Doddy the Great is hoping to keep up Nicky Henderson's good run of form. And do you have a next best for us?
And then the next best comes in the Veterans Final at Sandown, which is a race I love. It's the 3 o'clock, and it's Sam Brown for Anthony Honeyball, who's now the ripe old age of 13. He's the oldest in this. He's just a remarkable horse, and he's been so consistent. So he gets very little respite from the handicapper. But you'd expect his form to start dropping off, but he doesn't look noticeably weaker than he has for the last few seasons. He ran a really good race in the Charlie Hall. He was 5 lengths behind the real Wacker. That form has been frank. If you take Braveman's game out of it, who I just don't think turned up at all in the King George, the real Wacker finished 4th. I mean, running on at the end. So the Charlie Hall form doesn't look all that bad. He then went on to the Hennessy, ran off top weight, and just got taken off his feet. They went really fast early in the Hennessy. There was plenty that got out of their ground. He was one of them. He plugged on. He didn't stop trying. He was beaten a long way. could happily put a line through that run. He's won on soft ground. He's run really well on heavy. He was beaten just about 10 lengths by Shishkin in the Denman Chase February last year. He's a remarkable horse. Chad Bayman is the key here. He takes £10 off because he's £7 conditional, riding for his home stable of Anthony Honeyball. He's really impressed me. He hasn't had a lot of chances. He actually rode a winner at the last Sandown meeting over hurdles, but he looks good over fence. He sits quiet. He lets the horse do the work. That's going to really drop the weight down. He's going to carry 11 stone 4. He'll go on soft and heavy ground. He's got proven Sandown form. He ran a really good race in the Bet 365 last year, staying on, having got off to a fairly slow start. I think he's got plenty going for him. He's 13 years of age, but as Saint-Xavier showed just before Christmas in the last fling, who's 12, he'd now be 13. Age is but a number for some of these horses. If they retain their zest for racing, which Sam Brown appears to have done, I wouldn't let it put me off, and I think he's the one they've all got to beat in the Veterans Chase.
Okay, I'm going to add to Ross's selections at Sandown, and this probably mean that you've got a nice 4-leg ACCA boost for you to go with if you so desire our selections. In the 1240 at Sandown, I'm looking forward to seeing Dr. TJ Eckelberg for Evan Williams and Adam Wedge. Evan Williams really striking a little bit of form. He was struggling with winners in December, but over the last couple of days of that month and now hopefully into the new year, they seem to be kicking on again. They just needed the run, but they are horses that do really enjoy soft ground as well, which we've got. And I was at Chepstow on Welsh National Day to see Dr. TJ Eckelberg. He looked magnificent in the paddock. And just stayed on strongly, actually, to finish second behind the very well handicapped David's Well, who is just keeps on winning at the moment because he's been well placed, and it seems that a horse going places for the Chris Gordon team. But Dr. TJ Huckelberg has got a very respectable record. He hasn't been moved by the handicapper after that fine second, and I think this is a nice opportunity for him to add another victory to his name. He stays well, and as I said, he's got the soft ground on his side, so just shy of 2 miles. I think he actually is a kind of horse that would be able to see it out very well indeed. So that's the 1240. Then moving on to the mares hurdle at 225. Della Casalunga is another horse that I've seen win at Ludlow. It's props to Ludlow because Arizona Cardinal I found out there, Hatiti Kalua I found out there, and Della Casalunga might not have great racing ground some of the times, but there are good horses that appear there. And Della Casalunga, I remember seeing her win and speaking to her trainer Clyde Bookby Brooks, and said that she's got such natural enjoyment for hurdling. She's just a really classy type. She was a very good winner of a handicap at Kempton over Christmas time. They're going for this listed race. Valuable black type for her. Don't think it's a deep field at all. In fact, just 5 rivals to go up against her. She's in very good heart, and I think this is a good opportunity for her to add yet another victory to her name. So those are my 2 selections at Sandown to add to what Ross has given you, and the selection for TC as well. But as I said, this has been a slightly different podcast to begin off 2025. New normal service will resume again next week as we get to slightly more competitive action, but we'd imagine there might be a few racetracks called off over the next few days as it is, so hopefully we've got something for you to think about. If you are a new SBK podcast listener and you're a new SBK user, you'll get £40 in free bets when you sign up and bet £10 for the first time. SBK, we have lots of offers and promotions that we put on throughout the weekend, so make sure you check more out from SBK. We'll be back with you next week. Let's hope we get a little bit of racing, but if not, we can just sleep a little bit better thinking about those ante-post selections for later on in the year. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.